All right, Steven, what do you think? Is pain a choice?
I would say initially, no. People are either going to have an accident or have some type of traumatic incident that causes pain. That's not your choice. The other reason that people get pain often is for overuse injuries or just for no apparent reason. Maybe you slept funny and you woke up. And even though there's some overuse that comes with that, you don't know about that. Like you weren't cognitively aware of that. Each time I do this, I'm hurting myself. So I would say initially no. As more time goes on, it gets a little bit more of a maybe. Where what are you doing to help yourself with this? How are you approaching this? Are you further feeding into those habits? Or are you kind of reevaluating, hey, my body's telling me something, I'm in pain, something needs to change, let me make those changes. Yeah. So it kind of gets a little muddier the longer the timeline goes on until you have very chronic pain where, it's really hard to say if this is something that you're physically being caused or not.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. I think, something, say, like getting hit by a car is not necessarily your choice.
Right.
Or like even, if you go through like any kind of traumatic injury of like a ski accident or, any kind of, twist your ankle on like an uneven sidewalk, not necessarily your fault. However, yeah, I would agree. I think if you're subscribing to certain activities that, that type of activity is happening again and again, and then you're trying to still understand why you're having that kind of pain, it isn't necessarily something that you're gonna, if you keep going back to the well and expect different results, that's like definition of insanity.
Yeah, I usually tell people when they have a new problem or a new pain, give it 48 hours. And so many things clear up within 2 days where it's like, oh, my shoulder's bothering me a little bit today. All right, like give it to the end of the weekend and then most likely you'll be fine. If not, then let's reevaluate, because when you first hurt yourself, there's an inflammatory response that lasts about 3 to 5 days. So the first couple days are gonna be real brutal, and then after that, it'll start calming down. As long as it's progressing through that natural course of history as you would expect it to, you don't need to do anything. Just like let it run its course. It's when it's been like, all right, it's been like 5-6 days and this is still lingering on. Now I need to address this and figure out what I need to do to make this feel a little bit better, because there's something that's off. The first phases of those things are just kind of general movement, just like moving around, going for walks, using the joint within your tolerance. If you're doing an activity and it's making you feel worse, probably don't continue to do that activity for now. There's not necessarily good or bad movements. It's just how does this affect you currently? And currently that may be something that's flaring you up more. Versus you do some movements and you feel a little bit better, let's do more of those movements. So trying to keep it as general as possible. And then if that's not getting you the places you need to get, then starting to narrow down to like, okay, I need to break this down further. What specific movements do I need to work on or avoid for this period of time? And that's where I usually work with people, kind of trying to find out what those movements are and then working them back through until they're doing back to the general movements. I usually tell people when you have an injury, you're not fully recovered from it until you get back to doing what either hurt you or what you weren't able to do in the initial stages. So if I hurt my shoulder and I can't lift my arm overhead, I'm not really better until I'm back to doing overhead movements. Yeah. And I may avoid this for a while, but I'm always working back to that goal point.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and that's usually where I see a lot of clients as well, is like they're coming into their they want to get back to their previous activity, and maybe they've been discharged from physical therapy and they're still trying to go back and do those performance moves, but they're still having pain because now they're pushing themselves a little bit harder. And it's more so knowing the movements that are causing that kind of pain, as well as which ones aren't working within that pain threshold. And the best way to kind of go and see which ones are going to be the productive movements that you can work within that threshold or ones that are not. Oftentimes use like a red light, green light, yellow light kind of thing, where if you're 10 out of 10 pain, great, we're not going to do that kind of motion.
Yeah.
But if you're in like more so yellow, where it's like it's there, but it's not necessarily causing me agony, I can work within this and I can work through it. That's usually where I would do either like isometric movements to kind of calm things down, as well as any kind of like eccentric training to just try to go through the movements slowly so that the joint as well as the muscle kind of knows what to do through that motion, actively controlling it. And then obviously green light, you can like kind of go for broke. We can increase the resistance. We can mess with the tempo, as well as, just kind of, doing different things that would help with either increasing the motion as well as increasing the strength of the affected area.
Yeah, and I like using the different muscle contractions for different reasons because they're going to elicit different responses within the muscle. For like when somebody's in a lot of acute pain, I'll do isometrics to kind of get the response to calm down. After a muscle contracts, it usually relaxes right after, so that could be an easy way to just like neurologically get that to calm down a little bit in a very safe way. It doesn't involve any movement. And the traffic light system is great also. But what's interesting about it is you don't know how things are going to work until you test it. Because something could be like, oh, that's a really scary movement. I think that's going to hurt me. And then you start doing it, you're like, oh, that's getting easier. And then like, oh, that's kind of counterintuitive. I figured that would hurt me, but the more I did, the better I got. That's actually a green light. I should do more of those things.
Yeah.
So going through that, and you really don't know until you test it, is like an important key to remember. Where, oh, this hurts. Well, like, let's just see what happens. Let me do a couple of them, and then if I'm getting worse, okay, I'll stop now. You're not going to do irreversible damage by just reaching over a few times if that hurts. But if you do it 100 times, maybe you will.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I like to work with movement assessments too, because you get to see what motions are within someone's available ranges through like motions such as squats or overhead press or anything of that nature, where we take them through motions that, you know, they would just perform within, you know, without any kind of weight or anything, seeing if they have that available range to them. And then if they do, great, put it on with some loads, seeing what loads are responding favorably or non-favorably. And then if they don't have that range, great, we're not going to put them into that range until we build up the mobility and flexibility so that they can get to those points of motion. But then working within that available range so that we can still load the muscle and tissue to improve their overall performance, but not to a degree that's going to result in pain.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of these movements are so scalable, where like the same way you were saying, like, okay, you're doing well with this, let's progress that with more reps, weight, speed, whatever it may be. You can also regress these movements where it's like, all right, I have pain when I do an overhead press. All right, do you have pain when you do an incline press? No? Okay, totally. Do that until you can do the overhead press. Oh, You have pain with the incline press also? How about just like a regular chest press? Oh, that's okay. So you can kind of scale those things in either direction.
Yeah.
And that could be like a day-to-day thing where like some days I could do this, but other days I can't, so I do something else. And then teaching people who are in pain kind of those like parameters as like guidelines. Where like, hey, you're having a really good day, you're well recovered, so on and so forth, do more things. Next day, oh, I don't feel so good today. You're not worse because of that. You're just feeling a little bit less recovered, so let's scale around. And I usually like to tell people to try and find like 1 or 2 very consistent baselines. Because with pain, there's so much noise involved. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the activity is good, sometimes it's bad. So finding like, all right, this one thing's always tough to do. Let me use that to track my progress, because pain levels are so subjective. Like, is this a 5? Is it an 8? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's more of just kind of identifying what activities, functional baselines that you can or cannot do, and then using that to track progress. And then you may have a day where like your pain's way higher, but you can do more things, and that's still a sign of progress, that you're moving in the right direction, even though the pain may be a little bit more intense. You want to respect that, and like that's where you kind of scale things up or down, but you're still doing the right things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just knowing what that pain is takes all the scaries out of it. Like if someone woke up with blinding pain, their head's on fire, they might go to the hospital. But someone who deals with migraines, for example, it's like they know what that is.
Yeah.
And so it's so much more scalable of like, oh, I know this pain now. So how can I mitigate it under my own control and validity of like, all right, what do I have to do? What are actionable steps? And I think that's where like the pain, at least when it comes to the physicality of a person, comes into play of like, oh, okay, I'm working on this. And even if they go a little bit beyond that threshold, as you were saying, it's like, it's still so much within their capacity that they can do it because they know they're making strides in that direction.
Yeah. And that's huge for people because they're just very concerned, because obviously you're in pain. It's the first time you're experiencing this, and this is your only body you have. So like you're worried for your safety, and you can get into like hierarchy of needs, and that gets threatened. So you obviously get stressed, and that further perpetuates that pain response. And that's where people really end up in that chronic pain state. And that's not a choice. Like we were saying at the very beginning, that's when chronic pain is not a choice. You are that way because you had a response, you were confused, you didn't understand what was going on, and that perpetuated over months and then years and so on and so forth. So dealing with people with pain, a lot of it is the education, because that's where they kind of understand, oh, I know what this is. I know I'm okay. I have pain. I have to do something about this. But I know I'm like not in danger necessarily, assuming they are not in danger.
Yeah.
But once you kind of rule out those red flags, which is always the first thing you want to do, and you're like, okay, this person's fine, there's in pain, now we can start addressing that and kind of getting them moving around. And like circling back to the beginning, that's where the general movement comes in, like getting over the fear of that. You're not really getting stronger at that point. You're just like moving around and experiencing, okay, I have pain, but I'm not in alert mode anymore.
Right. I guess the active versus passive recovery. This is where I think, if you have stuff if you have different alleys of healthcare that will help mitigate the immediate pain and kind of put out some fires, I'm all for it. Obviously doing massage work, it's really nice to be able to work with someone. And if they're coming to you with a stiff neck or, frozen shoulder kind of stuff, and we're able to increase the range of motion by even something of like 20 degrees with overhead motion, that's huge. But I think it's more so and you can get the same kind of effects through chiropractic care as well as, acupuncture, or even, if you just slept on it wrong and you want to like pop an ibuprofen. I mean, obviously, not all for that, but I understand. Versus if you kind of just continually go to the well on those more so passive recovery steps versus that of active recovery of you taking, again, those actionable steps of what motions you can perform without pain. I'd say long haul, that would be a better form of just the long-term care.
Yeah, it should always be a means to an ends, where it's, all right, I'm doing the soft tissue work so I have 20 extra degrees of shoulder range of motion, so I can then strengthen that extra 20 degrees, so then I have that much more ability through that joint. What it's not going to be is, okay, I popped my ibuprofen, I got my massage, why am I still in pain?
Right.
Those things are going to help modulate symptoms, and in the short term, modulate the symptoms, and then long term, allow you to do more things. And there's still value to that. Yeah. Some of these things can get a little pricier when you get into like more of the passive recovery stuff. And there's value to those things because they make you feel better, which in turn allows you to do more active recovery, which is what's going to make you better. Yeah. But anything we do on like the passive stand front is to just kind of get you feeling better in the short term to then reinforce that with more active recovery.
Totally. Yeah. I'm a big believer in removing the restriction and then being able to now kind of reestablish that movement without that pain so that you can maintain it. Mm-hmm. Again, using the shoulder range of motion thing, it's like, okay, now you have that 20 degrees, great. Let's use it so that you never have to lose it again. To which, I mean, there's many different forms of that passive recovery, and it doesn't have to be as grandiose as massage work or anything of acupuncture. I mean, obviously, if it helps, it helps, and if you want to mitigate it as soon as possible, I'm all for people grabbing or getting the help that they need. Yep. But then obviously, there's some things that there's different kinds of pain thresholds where it's if you didn't get a good night's sleep, for example, and things are a little more agitated than they would be otherwise. Sometimes you can just kind of look at those sort of habits and be like, all right, what am I doing for myself in that way, opposed to going for, I guess, the more grandiose kind of passive recovery steps. Yeah,
and then having somebody there to guide you through that and answer those questions and be like, is this good or bad? Is this helpful or not helpful? And a lot of it's case by case, and you can kind of self-test those things out, but having somebody there to, like we were saying before, educate you and understand what's helpful and what's harmful, what's a good activity, what's a bad activity, and kind of going through that with somebody, and then also learning the steps and learning the thought processes. So then when you're on your own, because you're not just with people all the time, when you're on your own, you could then identify and be like, oh, this is good for these reasons, I should do more of it, or this is bad for these reasons, I should do less of it, until everything's A-okay. But it's kind of managing that and then learning how to do that. A lot of times when I give people exercise prescription, I don't give them reps and sets. I just kind of say, hey, do this exercise, keep the pain in a moderate level, low to moderate level, and do as many as you can up to this point. And if soon as that ramps up, you stop. As soon as that ramps down, add more weight, and kind of associating it that way. And then the biggest thing for me is always the after effect. If you do something and you're like, hey, that felt great, that was amazing, but then I can't walk afterwards, okay, that actually wasn't that helpful.
Right.
So I'll tell people, after you do this exercise, if you feel sore for 15 to 20 minutes afterwards, that's fair game. If it's 45 minutes to an hour and you're like, man, I'm really not feeling well, okay, scale back.
Yeah.
And kind of instead of giving hard reps and sets, kind of here are the parameters that I want you to work with, you call the shots on your own.
Yeah, fair. I would say, just to add on to that, the initial feedback is critical, but then also, if someone does like heavy leg day or something of that nature, but like their glutes and hamstrings are barking at them the day after, I'd be like, yeah, it does track. But if that then progresses over the week, I'm like, nah, something might have actually happened there. You don't need to we need to reassess in terms of your form as well as what kind of load you're putting yourself under there. And that would be like another way to like look at it. Great, if that is actually causing pain or if it's doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. I like to approach it in phases. Of phase one, like let's get you out of the acute pain you're in. Once you're back to like a baseline, like maybe I still have some pain, but like I'm walking around, I'm functioning in life the way I normally do. Then say, all right, what are you not good at? And then address those things that you're not so good at. When you're in pain, you're not going to be moving how you normally do. It's hard to get those answers at that stage. But once you're like, okay, I'm like not inhibiting my life because of the pain. This is how I normally am. That's when we say, all right, now let's figure out, is this a mobility issue? Is this a stability issue? Is it because my hamstrings are tight? What are those things that we're seeing that we want to start changing one by one?
Yeah.
But day one, if you're coming in with like a ton of acute pain, like saying like, oh, we need to like work on your hamstring flexibility. It's like, it's probably not today, but like getting to that as the symptoms change.
Right. Yeah. And then hopefully sustainably being able to make those long-term changes to where, again, maybe that pain was the initial prompter for them to come in, but then realizing that it is in fact like an entire operational, the body operates as one. So if my back went and my hamstring was tight, then those could be correlated, and knowing that having some autonomy around those muscle groups or areas can be beneficial for one's long-term care. I think that just gives the client at that point so much more power to be like, again, more autonomous within their own health and their own pain.
Totally. I want people to walk away saying, I feel better and I now have something to work on to make myself continue to feel better at. And if people walk away feeling better and having a new goal in mind, that's a huge win.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah.
I think that about covers it.
Cool.
Sick.